States Constitution. We heard a discussion of the current status of that lawsuit, the challenges that are presented by it, staffing, inmate population, and so forth. We are moving now into a second hearing that will deal with DOC, Department of Corrections operations. And that dovetails with the federal litigation and the federal investigation because it offers the opportunity for wise and healthy solutions to these problems so that going forward, we will not be subject to federal control, that we can have an Alabama solution that passes federal approval. This morning, we visited a correctional facility, and nobody can accuse this group of choosing a nice, pleasant fall day to go inside the prison facility. It's crowded, it's hot. They have fans, bunk beds, lights that stay on 24/7. You learn to sleep in the daylight. The brighter side was also shown to us in the context of training facilities, trying to get people ready to go back into society and be productive members. So what today's topic is DOC operations. Our mission is the charge given us by the government: gather facts, review areas, 3 areas, the DOC operation, which is the nuts and bolts. And we have a galaxy of speakers here that Commissioner Dunn has procured for us. We will have another meeting on sentencing, which deals with the way the justice system punishes. Are there ways for the punishment to be different without expense to public safety, but perhaps saving taxpayer money? That will move into another meeting on recidivism. What to do to keep inmates from returning to jail after their release, which is a win-win for society if they don't come back. We'll have a final meeting which will explore opportunities for various people who have proposals for how to get out of the problems we're in. And we'll have more to say about that later. Today we have with us Representative Connie Rowe, Senator Cam Ward, Senator Bobby Singleton, and Senator Clyde Davis. And of course we have Commissioner Jeff Moore. Catherine Robertson is representing the Attorney General today. So I've also been asked that for security purposes that the overflow facility is available. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Commissioner Dunn, who can then present witnesses who will update us on where we are and where we're headed. Thank you.
Justice Lyons, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak a few minutes on current DOC operations to the other members of the study group. Thank you for your ongoing and continued commitment to address this issue and to, in fact, seek a solution that our governor has described as an Alabama problem that needs an Alabama solution. Today, we have several briefers from the Department of Corrections to provide some information on the current state of our department and I highlight some of the efforts that we are taking to address these challenges. I want to just say that the ADOC's goal is in alignment with the principles outlined by Justice Lyons in our first meeting. So first of all, everything that we do in the ADOC is with an eye towards public safety. It drives our vision for the future, it drives our current mission and our daily activities. Second, we seek in all areas to provide a safe, secure, and humane environment for all of our employees and for those whom we are responsible. And then third, we recognize that the resources that we are provided to carry out this mission are taxpayer resources. They're hard-earned money from the taxpayers of the state of Alabama, and as a result, require good stewardship. Then, like this group, we seek to underpin everything that we do in our decision-making with accurate facts and data to ensure, to the maximum extent possible, that every investment that we make will result in a positive return towards the three principles that I just mentioned. I'm glad to have members of my team here today, and we're going to do this where we have one individual that will kind of lead the briefing, and we'll have several briefers come up, and I think at the end there will be an opportunity to the members of the panel for some questions, and I'll turn it back over to Justice Lyons at that point. But at this point, I'd like to introduce Deputy Commissioner Jeff Williams, who oversees our Government Relations and Community Corrections Department, to kick things off. Commissioner Williams.
Give us 1 minute, we're gonna shift down to the front row so we can see the graphics behind us. May have wondered why all the seats were being held open.
I'm going to attempt to kind of talk to you without holding this, and you tell me if you're unable to hear me. I'll speak loud. Good afternoon, Chairman Lyons, distinguished members of this committee. My name is Jeff Williams. I'm a Deputy Commissioner for Governmental Relations with the Alabama Department of Corrections. I am, in fact, a career employee with the department. I rose through the ranks from correctional officer to warden, and then to director of community corrections, prior to taking my current position as director, as deputy commissioner with government relations. Today's presentation will focus on three basic areas. There will be three speakers. The presentations are not long in length, and prior to bringing up the speakers, let me give you a little bit of information of what you'll basically hear. The first speaker will have a briefing and update on the accomplishments at Tutwiler Correctional Facility. The second speaker will talk about the efforts that have been most recent on an area of recruitment and staff retention. And finally, the third speaker will talk about efforts that more effectively utilize our current and future correctional officer staff, and also how we are looking to deal with creating a safe and secure confinement for inmates in our custody. But before I bring up the first presenter, let me give you just a general overview and background of our department. There are currently 26 correctional facilities, and they're spread out all over Alabama, covering 17 counties. 15 of those facilities are deemed as major facilities. 11 we call community-based facilities. And those community-based facilities are ones that house the lower level offenders who you might say are being prepared for reentry. Between the late 70s and 2001, the Alabama Department of Corrections inmate population rose from 5,000 to over 32,000. Now, today's numbers have been tremendously impacted by the 2013 presumptive standards and then the most recent criminal justice reforms in 2015. So today's population, the Department of Corrections, is just a little over 21,000. The department has roughly 3,200 employees. A breakdown of that is roughly 2,100 on the security side, and that includes every uniformed officer up through warden, and approximately 1,100 on the support side. Another note, most recently the department received some additional funding to to address some of the mental health issues in the department. As a result of that funding, we've been able to increase staffing on the mental health side. We've implemented a statewide training for all mental health employees. Additionally, we've been able to hire a director of psychiatry, a director of mental health, and 2 licensed psychologists. We're in fact making progress. We are making progress. Our first presenter is Dr. Wendy Williams. Dr. Williams is the Deputy Commissioner for Women's Services. Dr. Williams was appointed Deputy Commissioner in 2014. She oversees the Tutwiler Women's Facility, the Montgomery Women's Facility, and the Birmingham Community-Based Facility. In her position as Deputy Commissioner, Dr. Williams has personally navigated the department through the DOJ intervention of Tutwiler Women's Facility, and her presentation will highlight many of the accomplishments achieved over the last several years. Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today discussing some of the reform efforts that have been accomplished in our women's facilities. As Commissioner Williams said, I'm Dr. Wendy Williams, and I serve as the Deputy Commissioner for Women's Services. I provide executive oversight and operational oversight for 3 women's facilities that he's already mentioned. I began my employment with the Department of Corrections in 1987. So as Commissioner Williams indicated, I'm a career employee of this department. I started my work at Montgomery Correctional Facility as a correctional officer. I worked in our male facilities for many years. Was later appointed to the Director of Training position in 2002, and then subsequently the position I currently hold in April of 2015. My personal mission through my role, and the reason I go to work every day, is to make a difference. And hoping by making a difference that I can possibly impact the lives of the women in our custody so that they may successfully reenter society. So let me begin by briefly reviewing the evolution of the Department of Justice investigation that Commissioner Williams referenced. The Department of Justice began their investigation at Tutwiler Prison for Women in February 2013 with an initial focus on sexual safety and the reporting culture. Later, in January of 2014, a findings letter, much like the one that we just recently received for the male facilities, was issued with DOJ's concerns and their intent to expand the investigation at that point to include environmental health and safety. Swiftly, collaborative negotiations began between the DOJ and our department in March of 2014, concluding after nearly 15 months of negotiations with a settlement agreement that was then executed later in May of 2015. The Tutwiler 2 investigation, which is the expanded investigation that I referred to earlier, it actually exhausted in the summer of 2014, and to date we have not received a findings letter. And I think that's partially because they took some of their concerns from the investigation and included those in the settlement agreement that we're currently implementing. So in just over 4 years, the agency has substantially complied with 41 of the 44 provisions in the agreement. There are 2 remaining that involve staffing and 1 that pertains to programming and classification, which I'll talk more about later. Thanks to the recent funding support from the legislature, we're already well on our way to complying with those 2 provisions related to staffing. So these reform efforts, we believe, provide a model for the male facilities to follow moving forward. So the first thing we had to do was take a hard look at our culture, and recognizing that we have females in our women's facilities as opposed to men. We looked at the amounts of research that are out there on how to best manage the population of women in our custody. So we quickly learned 2 terms, gender responsive and trauma informed, which I have defined on the slides here. So I won't read those. So basically what we did was we took a look at all of our operational practices, from intake through reentry or release, and looked at them through those two lenses. How could we make them more gender responsive based on the research that's available to us, and how can we make sure that our day-to-day interactions are trauma informed? Why was that necessary? Well, research and data tells us nationally that 80 to 85% of our incarcerated women have suffered past victimization and abuse. So if we know that, then we need to ensure that our day-to-day practices do not unnecessarily trigger any further victimization while they're in our custody. Why did we need to look through the gender responsive lens? These are women. The pathways to criminal thinking and behavior look very different than those for men. So we needed to make sure that we adopted research that aligned with our operational practices moving forward. So, as I mentioned, we started by looking at intake, which is a process that every data that comes into our system works their way through. At intake, it's important for our classification team to take a look at the past of the individual as well as any relevant programming that might be helpful while they're in our custody as far as rehabilitation goes. So we adopted a Women's Risk Needs Assessment, and it's called the Women's Risk Needs Assessment, WRNA. Research tells us that by utilizing that assessment, we can better and more effectively classify our women to make sure we set them up for success, program them as we should while they're in our custody, aligning their needs to the needs that were identified through WRNA and aligning them to the programming that we have in place, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. So the next step beyond programming was how do we manage the population while they're there? Everyone's not going to get along all the time, so making sure we have effective accountability processes in place that again don't trigger further victimization, but hopefully instill some of the very things that the women are learning throughout their programming, how to self-regulate and how to self-manage emotions and behavior. So having our staff train on how to effectively role model much of that has been critical and ongoing. And then finally, if we know that the pathways to criminal behavior for women look very differently, then obviously the re-entry is going to need to look different as well. So we have to make sure that we have all of the, first of all, that the women have completed all the programming that we have in place. Sorry, I'm behind on the puzzle here. But we also have to ensure that we connect them with the resources that they're going to need to access in the community in order to be successful when they transition, because that is our ultimate goal. So let me share just a little bit of data with you on success so far. Over 3 years ago, we started routinely surveying the women at all 3 women's facilities, but most recently we surveyed the women at Tutwiler in June of 2019. And obviously we want to know if they feel safe. Well, 96% of us told us that they understand their right, that it's a right to feel sexually safe while they're incarcerated. But more importantly, 77% of them revealed to us that they feel sexually safe. 9% did tell us that they don't feel safe, which we somewhat expect because it's a diverse cross-section of women. Some of them are very new to the facility and may not feel as safe when they first enter. 14% of the women choose not to respond yay or nay to that question. Clearly, 100% is going to be our goal, and we're going to keep working on our operational practices until every woman in our care feels safe. So the classification process that I described earlier, which is the process that our staff will exhaust during intake to determine what the needs the women have for programming, but also what risk they may pose to us while they're in our custody. Well, before we started using the Women's Risk Needs Assessment tool that I mentioned, you can see by the percentages for August 1, 2016, we were overclassifying our women offenders by 54%. So now that we've implemented the Women's Risk Needs Assessment, the numbers you see in the right